What if I told you there's a secret growing wild all across America? A plant that's basically a biological engine cranking out one of the most powerful nutrients on Earth. The catch? For the better part of a century, we've been told it's just a dangerous weed. So let's dig in and find out what's really going on.
Okay, so here's the core of the mystery right here. On one hand, you've got the official story from agricultural agencies branding this thing a toxic pest. But on the other hand, the science is just undeniable. We're talking about a higher concentration of omega-3s than you'd find in farm-raised salmon. So which one is it? What's the real story?
60%. Let that number sink in for a second. That's the amount of alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, you can find in Perilla seed oil. And just so we're clear, ALA is the essential omega-3, the one our bodies literally cannot make on their own. This concentration is even higher than flaxseed oil, which, most people think of as the gold standard.
This really is the big question, isn't it? It's what drives this whole investigation. Why would our modern food system not only walk away from, but then actively try to bury what is arguably the most efficient omega-3 engine on the entire planet? Well, the answer is a wild story of forgotten history and industrial profit.
To really find the truth here, we've got to go back, way, way back, because we need to understand that for thousands of years, this plant wasn't a weed at all. It was the literal lifeblood of civilization.
Just look at this timeline. It's an incredible history. We have evidence that people were cultivating it for its oil over 5,000 years ago in Neolithic Korea. You fast forward a bit, and by the 9th century, Buddhist monks are using it as brain fuel for their meditation. It was so valuable, it was brought to America in the 1800s as a prized ornamental plant, right before it just vanishes from our culture.
And its utility was absolutely off the charts. This was not just a food. Its seeds gave people oil for cooking and for their lanterns. The leaves were used as medicine. Heck, the oil could even be painted onto paper to waterproof umbrellas. Think about that. It was basically a renewable, biological plastic, centuries before we had petroleum. This thing was a cornerstone of society.
So if this plant was so critical for 5,000 years, what on earth happened? Well, this is where the story takes a really sharp turn. From an ancient treasure to a modern target. And let me tell you, it wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate takedown.
And you won't believe how fast it all went down. After World War II, American farming changed forever. We shifted to these massive, mechanized fields of just corn and soy. This plant, which loves to grow in the margins, it just didn't fit the new factory farm model. So in the 50s, boom, it's officially rebranded a noxious weed. By the 80s, they found a convenient scientific reason to declare all-out war on it. And here's that so-called justification. The plant has a compound in it called Perilla ketone. Now look, it's true that if cattle eat a huge amount of it, especially in a dry field, they can get respiratory problems. But instead of just, teaching farmers about proper pasture management, this very specific niche issue was blown up and used to label the entire species of poison that had to be wiped out.
When you get right down to it, it was all about the money. Perilla oil is nutritionally a superstar, but it has a short shelf life, which makes it a pain to industrialize. Soybean oil, on the other hand, well, it's not nearly as good for you, but it's incredibly stable. It's perfect for mass processing, shipping, and raking in profits. We literally traded a high-performance nutritional oil for a low-performance industrial one.
But the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. Because now, modern science is starting to prove what our ancestors knew all along. The hard data is finally catching up to thousands of years of ancient wisdom.
Come on, this chart says it all, doesn't it? At around 60% ALA, Perilla oil doesn't just beat soybean oil, it's not even in the same league. It even edges out flaxseed oil. This is the smoking gun. This is the undeniable proof of the nutritional powerhouse we were all told to just ignore.
And get this, it's not just the oil. The leaves themselves are like a little pharmaceutical lab. They are packed with something called rosmarinic acid, which can actually help with seasonal allergies. They've got potent antimicrobials, and this part is key. They're way lower in oxalates than spinach, which means all those great minerals in the leaves are more available for your body to actually use.
So you might be asking, if this is so amazing, why isn't it front-page news? It's simple, really. Perilla is a plant that anyone can grow from a cheap packet of seeds. There's absolutely zero financial incentive for big pharma or big ag to fund massive studies on something they can't patent and control. It's a victim of its own freedom.
And that brings us to the most important part of this whole story. Knowing the history and the science is great, but reclaiming this knowledge for ourselves, that's the real game changer. It's time to stop thinking of this as a weed and start treating it like the staple crop it once was.
And you won't believe how easy it is to grow. Seriously, you just get some fresh seeds, toss them on the ground in the fall, and that's it. Let winter do its thing. You don't even have to bury them. Come spring, you'll have a carpet of one of the healthiest greens on the planet.
Getting that golden oil is also totally within reach. After you harvest and separate the seeds, all you need is a simple home cold press. Now the key, and this is super important, is to keep the temperature low to protect those amazing but delicate omega-3s. What you get is a fresh, potent oil that industrial factories just can't match. And this quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? This plant was never a weed in any real biological sense. It was an economic inconvenience. Its virtues had to be suppressed because there was a much more profitable, shelf-stable, and controllable alternative waiting in the wings. So by planting Perilla, you're not just growing a garden. You're literally reclaiming a piece of our shared human history. It makes you wonder, right? What other nutritional secrets have been buried for the sake of profit? If you found this journey as fascinating as I did, make sure to follow us for more deep dives into the stories that time forgot.
You've probably seen this plant growing on the side of the road, right? And you probably dismissed it as just another weed. Well, what if I told you it holds an incredible secret? It produces an oil so potent, it was once the lifeblood of entire civilizations. This plant is a forgotten powerhouse, and its story is one we need to unearth. Get this plant is one of the most efficient omega-3 engines on the entire planet. No exaggeration. And yet, for the last 70 years or so, modern agriculture has basically tried to make us forget it exists. They even branded it a toxic pest. So, the big question we're tackling today is, why?
Well, that plant is called Perilla, and over the next few minutes, we're going to dig into the story of this nutritional goldmine. We'll find out why it got buried, and more importantly, how we can bring it back into our lives.
All right, let's dive right into the science first, because honestly, the numbers behind this so-called weed they're absolutely staggering.
Okay, take a look at this chart. What's wild here is just how much Perilla dominates. I mean, we all think of flaxseed as the gold standard for plant-based omega-3s, right? And people spend a ton of money on farmed salmon. But Perilla oil, it just blows them out of the water. It's not even a fair fight. And that number right there, 64%, that's the peak concentration of alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, in Perilla oil. Now here's why that's so crucial. ALA is an essential omega-3 fatty acid. Our bodies literally cannot make it on their own. We have to get it from food. And Perilla is, by a long shot, the most concentrated source we've ever found.
So, with a nutritional profile like that, you'd think we'd be growing this stuff everywhere, right? But to figure out why we're not, we have to rewind and look at its pretty dramatic history and its major fall from grace.
This timeline really tells the whole story. It's a total rise and fall. For more than 5,000 years, Perilla was a super important crop. We've got archaeological proof it was a staple food way back in Neolithic Korea. Buddhist monks even used its oil as brain fuel for meditation. It even made its way to the US in the 1800s as a prized garden plant. And then, bam! Suddenly in the 1950s, everything just flipped. It was officially declared an enemy.
So, what was the official reason for this war on Perilla? It all came down to a compound called Perilla ketone. See, some research showed that if cattle ate a huge amount of it in a dry pasture, it could cause some respiratory issues. And look, that's a legit concern for ranchers, for sure. But the scientific nuance, it got completely lost in the public messaging.
So instead of just teaching farmers about smart pasture management, the plant itself got turned into the villain. But what was the real reason? Well, Perilla is a survivor. It loves to grow in the margins, and it just doesn't fit into the neat, easy, predictable rows of a factory farm. Declaring it a weed basically cleared the path for the real prize, the soybean oil industry, which, is chemically stable, super profitable, and way easier to control on an industrial scale. We essentially traded top-tier nutrition for industrial convenience. Okay, let's get back to the hard science of what we actually lost in that trade. What does this incredible oil do for our bodies? For a long, long time, researchers like Dr. Artemis Simopoulos have been sounding the alarm about a huge imbalance in our modern diets. We are just flooded with omega-6 fatty acids from things like corn and soy oils, and those drive inflammation. At the same time, our intake of anti-inflammatory omega-3s has just plummeted. This imbalance is now being linked to a whole host of modern diseases.
And this is where Perilla comes in, as the solution. The fatty acids in Perilla oil can literally, at a molecular level, change the makeup of our cell membranes. They make our cells more flexible, more resilient to the kind of oxidative stress that drives aging and disease. It's not just food, it's like a biological shield for your cells.
And here's the crazy part. The oil from the seeds, that's only half the story. The leaves of the Perilla plant are like a little pharmaceutical lab all on their own. You see, the leaves are packed with something called rosmarinic acid, and this compound is basically a natural antihistamine. It works by directly blocking the inflammatory pathways that trigger all those miserable seasonal allergy symptoms.
Now check out this comparison. We're all taught that spinach is a super health food, and it is. But it's also high in something called oxalates. And oxalates bind to minerals like calcium and iron, which stops your body from actually absorbing them. Perilla leaves, on the other hand, have way lower oxalate levels. So what does that mean? It means the minerals inside are more bioavailable. Your body can actually use them. It's just cleaner, more efficient fuel.
Of course, with any powerful plant, you gotta be smart. A little caution is needed. There just isn't enough data for anyone pregnant or breastfeeding, so it's always best to talk to a healthcare professional first. And because it can have a bit of a calming effect, it might amplify sedative medications.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now for the really fun part. How you can take this weed and turn it into what I call liquid gold right from your own home. All right, here is your action plan. And it's actually surprisingly simple. You just scatter some fresh seeds in the fall. Nature does the heavy lifting with something called cold stratification over the winter. That's just a fancy term for the cold weather getting the seeds ready to sprout in the spring. You'll want to harvest the leaves for things like salads and teas in the mid-morning. That's when their essential oils are at their peak. Then, late in the fall, you thresh the dried stalks to get the seeds. And here's the most critical part. Pay attention to this. You have to use a cold press that keeps the temperature below 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Those omega-3s are super delicate. High heat will actually turn this healing oil into an inflammatory one. Then you just store it in a dark bottle in the fridge. Simple as that.
So what's the payoff for this little bit of effort? Well, 1 kilogram of seeds, that's about 2.2 pounds, will give you somewhere between 350 and 450 milliliters of the freshest, most powerful omega-3 oil on the planet. This is your liquid gold.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe the most important point. Growing Perilla is about so much more than just nutrition.
You know, in an era of fragile supply chains and food quality that just seems to be going down, growing this plant is like a quiet act of defiance. It really represents self-reliance. It's a choice to take back control over the quality of the food, the fuel you put into your own body.
When you really stop and think about it, this completely redefines what a weed even is. It's not that the plant is useless, it's that its virtues were deliberately suppressed, all for the sake of a more profitable but less healthy alternative that was just easier to control and sell.
So, planting these seeds isn't just about gardening. It's a choice. It's a choice to feed your brain and your body with a fuel that hasn't been touched by a factory. It's about reclaiming a piece of our shared human history. So, the only question left is, are you ready?